Thank you everyone for joining us today. Really excited to learn about what these amazing panelists are going to say. My name is Clea Carrington. I'm the Executive Director for the Canadian Blockchain Consortium, and today's webinar topic is Deconstructing IIROCCSA Staff Notice 21-329. So who is affected? What are the obligations, and what does it mean for the crypto industry as a whole in Canada? I always love to start off a little bit with about who the CDC is. If you haven't joined our webinars before, thank you so much for joining. If you've been here before, thank you so much for returning. We are currently Canada's largest not-for-profit industry organization, and we really love focusing on advocacy, education, and really supporting the blockchain ecosystem all across the country. We were founded by this incredible woman. Her name was Suzanne West. She was the CEO of an oil and gas company here in Calgary, Alberta, and she believed that blockchain had an incredible opportunity to really shift and change the way business is done. So we keep our organization kind of going in honor of her legacy. If you'd love to learn more about us and what we do, please come join us at canadablockchain.ca. We host webinars almost every week, classes every month. We have magazines that come out, and we're always very active on social media. Of course, as a not-for-profit, we couldn't do what we do without all of our absolutely incredible members. Thank you so much to everyone here on the screen. Many of them have been with us since day one, since we started about 2017. And big thank you today to our gold member, McLeod Law. They are sponsoring this webinar today. They opened their doors in about 1980 as a two-person firm, and now they have over 55 lawyers in 40 different areas, and they are definitely one of my favorite law firms. So thank you so much for being with us. Matt has been such a huge supporter. So we also love it and engage with us. If you like our webinars, take screenshots of what you see, post it on Twitter, tag us, our hashtag is Canada Blockchain. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, as well as Facebook. There will be a Q&A, so we'll have about 45-minute discussion, about 15-minute Q&A. If you could please make sure to write your questions in the Q&A box, though. It's a lot easier for the moderator to be able to find them that way versus going in the chat. We definitely love active chats, but if you just keep your questions to Q&A, it'd be really appreciated. And of course, we'll have a live poll. We really appreciate when you take that because it helps us understand how you're learning about us and if you like the content that we're giving you. One of our things that we're really excited that we started this year is a free monthly magazine. It's been going since January, and every month it is a pretty quick read, but we do a lot of research in the space to give you a very comprehensive understanding on specific topics that are coming up that are relevant. Our next one coming out June 1st is going to be a lot around the volatility, risk and opportunity around Bitcoin. And our last one was for this month was ESG and sustainability around blockchain. So if you like it, please again, check it out, canadablockchain.ca. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to your incredible panelists for today that will be discussing this very in-depth topic. So Matthew Burgoyne, he's a partner at McLeod Law, and he is also our chair of the legal committee with the CBC, an absolutely incredible lawyer. So Matt, I will leave it to you to introduce the rest of your incredible panelists.
Okay, thanks, Clea. Yeah, I'm Matt, as Clea mentioned, from McLeod Law. This is a really exciting topic. It's a timely topic. We've got a great panel. There's just been a change. So Jonathan Dahl from BLG is not speaking today. Instead, we have Frank Hepworth. He's a student at BLG, and he's a cryptocurrency enthusiast to the max. I met him a few months ago, great guy and very, very knowledgeable about crypto and the tech. I think he's got an interest in corporate law and securities, but I'll maybe let him confirm or deny that. But welcome, Frank. We have Laura. Laura is a solicitor from Montreal at the McCarthy Tétrault firm. We have Evan, who is a litigator at Osler's in Toronto. Evan is well known in the cryptocurrency community, active on Twitter. Laura, I think are you a capital markets lawyer? Is that right?
Securities and regulatory, if you want to be specific, but yeah.
Great. Maybe what we'll do, if everyone can just do like a 2-minute introduction. I probably butchered everyone's introduction, but just maybe we'll limit the intro to 2 minutes, and then we can get right into the questions. So Frank, is there anything you want to add about yourself?
Sure. I think you covered it pretty well. Happy to be here today and happy to speak. I'm an inbound associate at BLG. the guy who was supposed to speak today, John Ball, I do work with him on any cryptocurrency related matter. So I do get that experience through him. And right now we're helping our cryptocurrency utilizing clients to get registered with the securities regulators and IIROC as they should be, and is the focus of the discussion today. So I hope I'll be able to provide some valuable info to the people on the call today.
Thanks, Frank. Laura, do you want to just add to anything to your bio that I might have missed?
Well, no, it was pretty accurate. I'm with McCarthy Tetro, as you said, in Montreal. Just to specify, my practice focuses on financial institution and financial products. So you can say widely securities and regulatory lawyer, which is why I'm happy to speak on this panel, because it's been months and even years in some respect that I've indeed been exchanging on how can we meet applicable regulations when the business models of your clients don't really match exactly the current regulations. So happy to discuss a little bit the further guidance we got.
Thank you. Last but not least, Evan.
Thanks, Matt. As you mentioned, I'm a litigator with the Osler firm in Toronto. Within my litigation practice, I focus on cases, disputes, that sort of thing involving technology. But within that, a fair bit of work relating to advising clients on risks associated with crypto, as well as helping them with its commercial disputes or regulatory enforcement matters. So I come at the crypto asset industry from that perspective. When things don't go as planned, let's just put it that way.
It's always great to have a litigator's perspective on a panel like this. So I'm a business lawyer. I do a lot of work in securities regulatory law, and I know that when clients are on the receiving end of an audit by a securities regulator, it's always good to have a litigator involved. So Evan, it's a great perspective to bring to a panel of solicitors. So we've got a really interesting topic, I think, today, and great panelists, all about cryptocurrency asset trading platforms, or maybe crypto exchanges as they're called in the industry, and crypto trading platforms in Canada and how they're regulated in Canada, specifically by securities regulators. Canada has been more active, I would say, than other jurisdictions as far as securities regulatory action and notices. And, there's been a lot of notices published by the Canadian Securities Administrators. That's the collective organization of provincial securities regulators on the issue of crypto exchanges. And on March 29th, there was a joint Canadian Securities Administrator IIROC notice published that has some pretty significant effects on crypto asset trading platforms, but other businesses as well, not just trading platforms. So maybe we'll start by talking a little bit about the history of cryptocurrency regulation in Canada. So what is, generally speaking, the history of regulation in by securities regulators in Canada specifically? I'll just open up the floor. Question.
Sure. I can say that we can divide it into maybe 2 to 3 chunks, where the first notices came out in response to the ICO boom that was happening in 2017. A lot of companies were issuing cryptocurrencies, and regulators, specifically the OSC, began saying that these are capital raises, you're selling securities, and these are subject to securities regulations. And then it moved into the area where we are now, which is the regulations that apply to crypto asset trading platforms. There's been a question over if you're trading a cryptocurrency and the cryptocurrency isn't a security, meaning that it doesn't look like a stock of a company. An example would be Ether or Bitcoin Cash, one of those commodity-like cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin. The question is whether if a platform facilitates the trading of a commodity like cryptocurrency like that, what regulations, securities regulations, if any, apply to that? And that's sort of the realm we are in now. It started off with the ICO boom, and that was sort of the catalyst that drew the ire of Canada's security regulators and regulators around the world, actually. But now that has sort of, the dust has sort of settled on that topic, especially because we see so few ICOs anymore. And now we're moving into this area that we're speaking about today, which is even if you are not doing a capital raise per se, what security regulations apply to your platform?
Thanks. Thanks for that, Frank. Anything to add, Laura or Evan?
There's just maybe, and I'll let Evan speak after. Just one thing I would like to clarify, because I think the CSA and IIROC also make it very clear whenever they come out with these types of guidance notice, is that in Canada, the regulators are adamant that these are not new regulation. These are just clarification on how the currently existing regulation can apply to what it is that the market is doing. And I think that's an important point of note.
Great point. Nothing new, no new rules. These are just new interpretations on existing rules. So
exactly, and but what is hard and what they're trying to do, and the reason why we see consultation paper and then notices and then further guidance, is because we, the industry, provide comments, which is very important to do. Go ahead and provide comments whenever you can. And,
right.
and supposedly it evolves. The guidance can evolve the more they understand the business models and the more they get to see, and we'll get into the whole registration exemption application later, but the more they get to interact with people that are currently carrying out business and trying to meet the regulation. And sorry, Evan, I took the floor.
No, that's okay. Evan, do you want to, I'm curious as to some of the policy reasons behind the legislation. If you want to maybe touch on that question, or if you have anything to add on the history of the regulation, but I am curious as to why now? Why are the regulators doing this now?
Well, just to pick up on what Laura was mentioning about the discussion paper, and this latest staff notice is really the culmination of publications that Canadian securities regulators have put out over the last 2 years. This idea that securities regulators have jurisdiction to regulate crypto asset trading platforms really finds its origins in a discussion paper that the CSA, the Canadian Securities Administrators, and IIROC published in, I think, March of 2019. Which then led to a staff notice in January of 2020, and then this is the most recent staff notice. And the regulators have telegraphed their view that they do have jurisdiction under existing law based on their interpretation of those laws. And that history is important because then it ties into the policy, which March 2019, when this discussion paper I mentioned that Laura mentioned first came out, was very shortly after Quadriga CX collapsed and went into insolvency protection, and you know, as people are familiar, it turned out that the owner, the operator, Gerald Cotton, had been misappropriating client assets for many years. The exchange was deeply insolvent, and as a result, you know, many tens of thousands of customers are out, literally hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think that really was a motivation behind the discussion paper that came out in March 2019, not to say that the securities regulators had not been looking at this issue prior to that. And I'd also note that the Ontario Securities Commission, very quickly after the Quadriga filed for court protection, they initiated an investigation into Quadriga and ultimately published a report in, I think, May of last year, which did a very deep dive into the causes and consequences of the failure of Quadriga. But anyway, it illustrates that one of the primary motivations, the policy issue, the concern here of regulators, is that where you have these intermediaries, these exchanges that have custody of literally hundreds of millions, possibly billions of dollars worth of client assets, there is an incredible investor protection issue there because of not just the risk of assets being lost or misappropriated, but there are a number of other issues about conflicts of interests and market integrity that are motivating this guidance, but custody and the protection of client assets, at least my sense is that is the primary and most fundamental concern of regulators and what motivates this guidance, including most recent guidance.
Excellent. Frank or Laura, anything to add to that on the policy reasons?
No, I completely agree, because I think we will, as we dive in, Evan uttered the word custody for the first time here, but it's not the last. We will talk a lot about custody, and it flows from what Evan just says. So that's a great introduction to diving in.
That's great. Laura, I have a question specifically for you, because isn't something we've really talked about on these panels before. How is Quebec treated differently than the rest of Canada?
The Quebec representative here.
Yes, securities regulation we're talking about. How, if you're a platform in Quebec, how is it different?
Okay. Well, that's a great question. I think it is good to know because usually these platforms are, if not international, at least pan-Canadian, and they have Quebec clients. And as most people know, we do have a Quebec Derivatives Act here and associated regulation, which makes it very different from the rest of Canada, because under that Derivatives Act, we do have registration requirement and authorization requirement from the AMF as soon as someone markets a derivative in Quebec. And what that means is when you go into the first consultation paper in 2019 all the way to the March 2021 one, the derivatives are mentioned quite a number of times. And we get to understand that under these guidance, derivatives are not only the easily characterizable ones that are options, swaps, or name it. They're anytime what they call a crypto contract. Anytime there is not immediate delivery, and we'll dive in the concept of immediate delivery afterwards. But what's important from the Quebec perspective is to know that everything we will describe on the fact that it's a crypto contract or that it can be seen as a derivative means here that someone who markets it needs to register it under the Quebec Derivatives Act with the AMF and get each of what is interpreted by the regulator as being a derivative authorized as per the existing regulation. So that's a specificity here. Of course, derivatives are regulated all over Canada, either as securities or in other ways in the other jurisdiction, but it shouldn't be forgotten that DMF has its own set of rules here.
I think the message is, if you're a platform in Quebec, get legal advice. Don't try to go it on your own. It's a complicated system for sure. Like not unlike the rest of Canada. Frank, maybe we'll start with you here. Who is affected by this recent CSA IIROC notice that came out on March 29th? Is it just like what kind of businesses are affected?
Yeah, I think you should, if you're someone who's worried about if you're affected by this notice or not, I would start with the question of, do I handle cryptocurrencies for the benefit of someone who's Canadian? And then sort of, if the answer to that is yes, then you can sort of work down a yes and no question tree to get to the answer. But basically, if you're helping someone, if you're buying or selling cryptocurrencies to a Canadian, or you're helping a Canadian buy or sell cryptocurrencies against someone else, you're very likely going to be affected by this notice. So in the first situation, that would be a dealer, and the regulators who put out this notice want you to go to them and apply to be what's called a restricted dealer, which means basically a dealer with some special conditions on it. And a restricted dealer, or just a dealer generally, a restricted dealer in this cryptocurrency case is you're going to be buying and selling cryptocurrencies. against a Canadian client. And if you were to be helping Canadian clients buy and sell cryptocurrencies against other people or with other people, this notice is saying that you're likely going to be, or you're possibly going to be a marketplace. And if you do either of those two functions, you need to look at this notice, because you're affected.
Okay. Evan, anything to add to that about who's affected?
I would say, I mean, it's yeah. I think the key thing is, it's, although the focus of the notice is on crypto asset trading platforms, and that's a term that's used throughout the notice and the notices that have been issued. Frank's point is a very important one. It's not. It's about the relationship that a platform has with the customers and the assets, and even if the relationship involves transactions other than buying or selling, and for example, things like lending, to the extent there's a custodial aspect, that is where the platform has some control over the client's assets. When just going back to the policy reasons I was alluding to earlier, I have to ask whether or not that is something that the regulators are looking to regulate. And so you have to really look at, I think, not just the sort of the text of the notice, but also the policy behind it and what's motivating it. The regulators are focused on protecting investors from particular risks, and in particular risks of having somebody else, a platform, having control of their crypto assets. The other thing I'd sort of note too, it's not just the trading platforms. It's also not just the custody either. I mean, the notice does make reference to crypto assets, even if you don't have custody of the assets for somebody else. If you are in the business of trading a token or other crypto asset that is in and of itself a security or a derivative, that may trigger obligations under securities laws as well. So even if there isn't a custody element, you have to look at what is being traded. And then another dimension I'd emphasize is that this isn't just focused at companies that actually have a presence in Canada, employees in Canada, offices in Canada, to the extent anyone has offices anymore. It's focused on anyone who has Canadian customers or making their services available to Canadians. From the regulator's perspective, having accounts with Canadians, offering services to Canadians, that can be sufficient to give them jurisdiction to regulate the activities of platforms. So there is an effort, and this has been underlined in these notices of the regulators, to make foreign-based platforms aware that as far as the regulators are concerned, they are subject to Canadian regulators' jurisdiction as well. So I'd emphasize those points, and Lord may have some others to add. But the point is this guidance is quite far-reaching in terms of who it potentially affects.
That's a great point, Evan. It is. Some people just assume that it's only the crypto exchanges that are caught by this guidance, and that's not the case. There was a point raised by one of the attendees. It's a really good reminder. If you are planning to operate in Quebec, follow up with the AMF. The analysis of crypto asset contracts as securities versus derivatives is evolving, and so I think that's an important point. Laura, do you have anything to add to that, or do you have anything to add to what Evan said?
Well, on the comment that was made, yes, that is correct, that the AMF is of course still considering how and when you fall under the Securities Act or the Derivatives Act. And as I said, the regulation that falls is not strictly the same. So that is a great point. On who is covered by the regulation, I would just re-emphasize Evan's point that the concept is Canadian investors protection. So that's if you grant services to Canadians, you may be affected. To me, that's the.
Okay. I'm going to throw this question out, and whoever wants to answer it first can take it up. When we talk about, so In the notice, it mentions immediate delivery, this concept of immediate delivery, and the concept of custody. So how is custody even relevant, and what does immediate delivery mean?
So I think the reason custody is relevant is notably, as Evan mentioned, because that is where a big part of the risk lies. But if I may just go to what immediate delivery means, I think my understanding of these notices is that it's a very it's a concept that applies to a lot of different circumstances. As soon as the investor, the customer, does not have full control of the assets without having to go through you, the platform, or the person having delivered it to him or her. So that it's really a concept of having full, not only legal ownership, but also full control without needing another person, and more particularly without needing the platforms to interact with the platform to get it. Evan, I don't know if you.
Yeah, I know. Evan, I think you touched on custody a little bit. Is there? I don't know if you've got anything else to add to that.
One thing I think the scenario that I believe this is made clear in the notices, the one scenario that seems to satisfy regulators' view of immediate delivery is an on-chain transaction to an account or an address that is exclusively controlled by the customer. That it seems to be quite clear, at least as I read the notice, that is considered immediate delivery. Where I think you get into very interesting debates is what it can immediate delivery be affected in some other way, and how does it interact with technology such as multi-signature wallets or multi-party computation, where the customer may not have, strictly speaking, exclusive control, but you also don't have the risk that the regulators are concerned about, which is that the intermediary, the platform, has sufficient or exclusive control of the asset such that they can do something inappropriate with it. And these technologies, I think, there are going to be some interesting discussions, I'm sure, between, and no doubt they're already happening, between platforms and regulators about whether there is a technological middle ground that constitutes immediate delivery, but is not necessarily the scenario outlined in the notice where where the crypto asset is transferred to the address, and I think the question will be whether technologies like multi-signature wallets or MPC might achieve the objectives of the regulation without necessarily having that full delivery to the client on chain.
Excellent.
Some context for those on our call that perhaps aren't in the finance industry. Custody is such a topic within crypto because prior to cryptocurrency, the financial industry, the matter of custody was already a given. You wouldn't be able to distribute a derivative or a security to a retail client without a host of existing legacy financial institutions to facilitate that transaction. So custody has never been as big of a topic as it is right now. With cryptocurrency, a retail client through an app on their phone can get immediate delivery of that in the time that it takes, in time for the block to settle. And that's a big difference, and it has really thrown off. It's a pointed cause of concern for regulators because a lot can go wrong in that process, and there's not as many safeguards. And so for the sake of risk mitigation, that's why we're seeing custodial solutions and the discussion of custody to be such an important topic right now when it comes to crypto asset trading platforms.
Great point. Thanks, Frank, for that clarification. So maybe Laura or Frank, Laura, do you want to? So you've got a business where you're holding custody of someone else's keys and coins. and you may not be providing immediate delivery, or maybe you're trading a security token. How do you register, and what does it mean to register with the regulators?
So how, and I think I'm gonna answer in two parts, because there is the full-blown set of rules and regulation that has always applied, and that applies when you don't get any exemption and the regulator decides that you should apply every rule. And then there is a second option, which is a more tailored application for an exemption and a more tailored result. So the first one is a process where you contact the regulators in each jurisdiction where you have clients, customer, and or investors, depending on what it is you do. You may, in certain circumstances, go through a channel that is somehow centralized. The CSA, Canadian Securities Administrators, can sometimes help you with this. It always depends on on exactly what it is you do, but it's a process of a little bit answering a lot of questions, showing a lot of information about your business, about your practices, obtaining the appropriate regulators' authorization to register. And then once you're registered, there is a whole set of rules that apply, which go from limited minimum capital requirements. Certain individuals within your org chart must have certain specific education and diplomas to be able to control the way business is being carried out. Policies and procedures must be put in place. So it's a whole host of daily things that will need to be done. But it's important to note that the regulators want to keep innovation going. And when it is justified, you can go and see the regulators and negotiate a tailored set of regulation that is justified for your business model, but does not impede a specific innovation that they would like to see in the market. So that's why I said I would answer in two parts. It's that there is what currently exists. And as we said earlier, the regulators have not made any new rules. So they're playing with the old set of cards in a way. So there is this old set of cards, but they are open, and they say it in each of their notices, to discussing each and every business model in order to make sure that you can tailor the requirements. And that is why you have a kind of a lockstep approach in the latest guidance, where in each paragraph, they describe what is the interim approach and then what is the end game of full-blown regulation.
So it sounds like the regulators are trying to take a flexible approach, knowing that these are, in some cases, really unique business models, and that might not fit neatly into the existing rules. So they are willing to sit. That's been my experience as well. They are willing to sit down and tailor certain requirements, provided that policy considerations are being otherwise dealt with. Yeah.
And so provided you contact them. Provided you don't just go ahead.
You don't just.
Yeah.
That actually leads me to my next question. Maybe I might bop around here a bit, but Evan, this is a question on everyone's mind, $1 million question. What happens if you don't? What are the consequences of non-registration if you don't comply? If you just put your head in the sand and, like I know some platforms inevitably are, what can happen to you?
Right. So, well, the staff notices from last year and more recently have said quite clearly that failure to register where a platform, or failure to take steps towards registration, because there's an acknowledgement that registration isn't going to happen overnight for the reasons Laure was touching on. But a failure to take those steps could lead to enforcement action, and particularly the Ontario Securities Commission put a very fine point on it recently when, in conjunction with the latest staff notice, issued a press release which said, effectively, if you're subject to this guidance and you don't contact us by this deadline, which I believe was April 19, 2021, then we will take steps towards enforcement action. And indeed, we saw just earlier this week that the Ontario Securities Commission has gone and done that. They have commenced an enforcement action against the Poloniex platform, which is well known, and the allegations, and they're just allegations at this stage, is that the Poloniex is not complying with Ontario securities laws, and the OSC is seeking to, among other things, levy penalties and prohibit them from operating, at least within Ontario. So the consequence of not taking steps and ultimately register is that enforcement action may be taken by any of the securities commissions, I suppose, but at the moment Ontario is the one that has said most clearly that it will take these steps, and that can lead to a hearing before a panel of commissioners of a provincial securities regulator, and that panel will decide. Because one thing that's important to note here is that the guidance that's been released is the guidance of staff of the commissions, and ultimately it's a different group of people. It's the commissioners themselves, or a panel of them, who will make decisions about whether or not a party has acted contrary to a securities law, and will ultimately make the decision about what penalties or other consequences flow from that. But to your point, what are the consequences? They may include monetary penalties, may include reprimands, they may include prohibitions from operating in the event that a commission ultimately finds that a platform is violating securities laws.
Great, thank you. You probably want to contact the regulators and comply. I mean, from my experience, it's going to cost you a lot more money and time and reputational harm if you don't. Frank, do you have anything to add to that, or Laura?
I suppose the only thing that I would add is just that it's easy to think that this will only apply to the big players, institutional players, and everyone other than you. Maybe the Binance or the Poloniex or the big trading platforms in Canada. But if you have started a small enterprise, which is very easy to do in this space, and you're helping a few clients do the things with crypto assets that are specified in this notice, this will apply to you. So even if you are a small shop and it's maybe just you running it off of your computer or with one or two others, if you fit this definition, this does apply to you, and you may look at what's required by this notice as being so substantial and surely not applicable to you, but it will be, and it's going to be worth investigating into.
I completely agree. It's a good point. Laura, anything to add?
Well, I think it shows what Frank just said is kind of showed by the fact that the OSC has said that 70 platforms have started discussing with them. So yes, it is not just the huge players, and these 70 there are actually some that are not in these and that have not initiated the discussions that they maybe should have had. So the number of potential platforms in Canada is huge, and it's not just only the big players.
Right. I'm just going to throw this question out there. Do you guys think like 70 platforms in Canada, do you think that's too many? Does that sound high to you, or is that to be expected in the space given the momentum of this latest bull run? I don't know. It just seems like that's a lot for a country Canada's size.
It's not surprising that there's that many platforms. It's surprising that many contacted the OSC.
Okay. Yeah, these notices do work, right? I mean, people do pay attention to them. I found that, yeah, I mean, we do really have in Canada a pretty healthy cryptocurrency industry. I mean, a lot of it is in Toronto. I mean, there's some activity out west where I'm located, and in Quebec. Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly a sign that there is a lot of business out there for sure. I want to go back to the notice, the CSA IIROC notice, for just a moment. We do have time here. I just want to, if people can talk about, this might not be your bailiwick, Evan, but Laura and Frank, what are marketplaces, and what is a marketplace, and maybe a crypto contract, because those terms are used quite heavily in the notice. So I'll throw it out there to those who want to answer. So what is a marketplace, and what do they mean by a crypto contract?
Okay. And I think, Frank, you may want to give examples of names, and maybe I can go with the idea of what it is. And the concept of a marketplace platform is actually quite not as broad as you would think, defined in the notice. They're regulating two types of platforms. So the dealer platforms on the one hand, which is really just facilitating the primary distribution of security tokens, and the platform itself being the counterparty to each trade, and client order not interacting between themselves. And that's, I think, is a lot of players. Maybe even almost all of them right now, because liquidity providers are actually the ones that take up most of the trades on these platforms. But then you have the marketplace platforms, which is the second type that are being regulated here. And this is really a facility that brings together multiple buyers. So it's really imagining a real marketplace as in the old days, where the orders can be met and matched through prescribed rules that are non-discretionary. So there isn't an entity, there is an entity in the middle, but there isn't a decision being taken of matching orders. They're being matched through prescribed rules that already exist. And that's it. Actually, that's like really a real marketplace. What I was describing here is things like the TSX, things like the big exchanges that you know. So that's what a marketplace is, as opposed to a dealer platform. But both need to register. So even though the marketplace platform definition is not that broad, you much more easily fall under the dealer platform definition.
Frank, can you give some examples of some companies that might fit or as a marketplace or a dealer platform?
Sure. The reason we use dealer or marketplace, just for the context, for the people, again, not in the space, is that these are existing terms before crypto. And so when we're trying to put regulations onto crypto businesses, we use the existing categories, and that's where we get marketplace and dealer from. A good way to recognize a marketplace or recognize a platform that is likely to be a marketplace is if they have an order book. Do you see the bid and ask spread? That's going to imply that there are users trading with each other, because the matching bid and ask is the trade between the users. If you don't see an order book, it's much more likely to be a dealer. And so examples of these are, I'm very loyal to ShakePay. They're based out of Quebec, so they're, shout out to Laura, they're regulated by the AMF. They just buy and sell Bitcoin and Ether. They're an awesome company. I love ShakePay. And then a possible example of a marketplace, I say possible because there's much more examples in Canada of dealers than there are marketplaces, or companies that are likely to fit within those definitions. And NDACs, for example, which are here in Alberta, they provide an order book. And so that would suggest that they're more likely to be considered a marketplace or carry out marketplace functions, because you can see the bid and ask spread.
Cool. Evan, I've got a question for you. I know you're involved heavily on Telegram and Twitter with a lot of US lawyers that are involved in crypto. But as far as Canada goes, when thinking about the staff notice that came out on March 29th that we've been talking about, what are the broader implications for Canada specifically, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think there's a few. I mean, just going back to a question you asked a second ago, Matt, about, you know, is 70, is 70 too many, too few, just right? I mean, it's just one implication I'd note is that I would not be surprised if we see some consolidation in the industry, simply because the cost of being a registrant, of going through the, you know, not just the legal, but also, you know, and Laura or Frank could speak to this more astutely, I'm sure. But you know, there are requirements for audited financial statements, and there are requirements for certain personnel. There's minimum capital requirements. Beyond just the legal fees associated with establishing a registrant, there are a lot of other costs that go into it. And the question is going to be whether, given all those costs, some platforms, whether there's a business case for going it alone, or whether we'll see consolidation around fewer larger players. But the other implication I note is, you know, Canadian regulators have been furthering this regulatory initiative to regulate crypto asset trading platforms for a couple of years now. And it's actually really only recently you're starting to hear talk of that, or at least I've only started hearing talk of that in US circles, you know, in US in Congress, and among other stakeholders in the US, about there being a need to regulate the trading platforms themselves. And to a certain extent, that's done at a state level and with New York and a bit license, but there isn't sort of far reach, there isn't federal regulation of crypto asset trading platforms in the US. So, you know, in a way, I mean, one of the, you know, potential implications of this initiative is, you know, Canada may be something of a regulatory leader in that it's confronting these issues first, and it's going to have to work through these issues, and that may inform what happens in other countries. And frankly, you might see interest from foreign platforms in becoming registered in Canada, because it does offer them a path to being regulated, which could be an advantage going forward, when there aren't alternative avenues that exist in really any other comparable jurisdiction. So I think it would be surprising how this might actually attract certain parties to Canada as opposed to repel them.
Great comments. Laura, Frank, anything to add?
Well, Ivan, I tend to be on the same side where you usually see that regulatory certainty can be seen as good for a market rather than being unregulated, and that's what we're getting here. I'm personally very proud that we have the first Bitcoin ETFs, and that our regulators are coming out with showing their understanding, their will to discuss with the market, and trying to establish something that eventually is going to satisfy the players, and including all the young investors that are very involved and interested in the space. But I would love to hear what Frank has to say as a representative of the younger generation here.
The new generation. Frank, what do you think? What does the younger generation think about the implications of this?
Well, they're not thinking about it, right? They're just going to go to wherever's easiest. But yeah, it's going to be great for institutions that want to get access to crypto. Like, there are some great returns to be made, so that we're taking a regulatory lead is going to be great for institutions. And I think Evan's totally right. We're going to see more institutional money come up north here to make use of that access. But for the retail client, it's just so easy to access offshore markets, non-jurisdictional markets, because of course DeFi is its own, or decentralized finance is its own infrastructure that's accessible, and there's no obvious way to prevent access to that. And so, not even my generation, I'm still a millennial, but the Gen Zs, if you see what's going on TikTok right now, the way that they celebrate cryptocurrency, well, I love it, but I see huge risk in it, and so I don't love it for that reason. And then if they somehow run into a limit or an inefficient price due to regulation, they're going to have no issue, because they have no issue right now, learning the skills needed to just have a browser wallet like MetaMask, or even like Brave Wallet, which is a very wonderful web browser called Brave. And they have a built-in cryptocurrency wallet that's extremely easy to use, and you can use it with a decentralized finance infrastructure readily. And I don't see an easy way to enforce regulations on that at this point. And so again, if the younger generation runs into inefficiencies or not as potentially lucrative opportunities due to controls, they'll be incentivized to look elsewhere, and there'll be all the risks that go along with that.
Thank you. Yeah, I know it's interesting. It kind of what you touched on DeFi, and it's an interesting question of how regulators are going to regulate DeFi. When there's arguably a series of smart contracts, executed code. I've heard that they'll look behind that to the human involved, and the coder who's coding for profit might become personally liable in certain cases. So they'll look behind the automation to the person who's actually, the human who had originally developed the technology potentially. But very interesting point though, and there's such a variety of ways to buy and sell crypto now. So I guess, it remains to be seen what will happen with Canadian consumers and their habits. I know we've got quite a few questions, and I do want to save a good amount of time for those. This is my last kind of scripted question that I'll just throw out there. Do you think the regulators are finished? Is this it for their guidance, or is this just the beginning of something? And do you see new laws being written? I'll just throw it out there. Whoever wants to speak can go first.
The short answer to your question is the end of it, no. And I think for the reason Laura was that the existing regulations that exist don't neatly map onto the business models that exist in this industry. And so there are going to have to be there are going to be exemptions, there are going to be terms and conditions attached to registration that vary the requirements to adapt to the business realities, the technical realities. And I think as regulators engage with platforms, there will be additional guidance and provided as to systematize that, to set out, okay, we're prepared to make concessions and exemptions on these requirements, but not on these. And frankly, I think you'll see that sooner rather than later. And I think the other thing is they may vary by province. You may see some provinces taking a slightly different approach than other provinces in terms of what they're going to permit or restrict. And then as for you said, are you going to see new laws? Because remember what we're talking about here is guidance and in terms of conditions, as opposed to laws that are passed by provincial legislatures or perhaps parliament. Who knows? Maybe, but my sense is that it doesn't seem to be very advanced on any politician or policymaker's legislative agenda. So I think for now, the actors who are going to be helping to define what regulates this space are going to be the regulators, the staff of the regulators, and the industry participants.
Yeah, and I think it may be important to note, Frank has emphasized in quite a few instances how the things we discuss here are things that already existed in the security space. And the idea that their exemptions are being granted, discussion with the regulators are happening, and even sometimes when a business model becomes a little bit usual, the same exemptions may be granted on a quite repetitive manner under the same terms and conditions, because the business model looks like one that they've already looked at and agreed to certain exemptions, is something we've been doing for decades. it's something in the before anything crypto, before any fintech, before any of this that the industry, their legal counsel and the regulators have been doing. So I like Evan says, I see us going this way for quite a while before there be a good actual overarching overhaul of the system, because I don't think they've have it all figured out, as you said, because it's still evolving, and it's better to make tailored approach, understand before you move, and I think it's a, if I may, I think it's a good approach, and I'm happy that we're going that route.
I just want to say some of the countries that have actually passed cryptocurrency specific laws, like Bahamas or some other, it might be that they're trying to drive business to those jurisdictions, and that it's not really practical to make laws that specifically deal with crypto assets. I've heard that argument before, about some other, specifically offshore jurisdictions that have enacted, crypto specific laws. So let's see here. Frank, do you have any other comments, or should we move to Q&A?
We should move to Q&A.
Move to Q&A. We've got like 10 questions here, and that might be a record, Clay. I don't know. Clea, do you want to run through the questions, or do you want me to? I mean, it's always the monitor's job to do that.
I absolutely can if you'd like me to. Happy to do that. Let's pop back on the screen for a quick second. All right, so we have our first question here. Does the CSA's reaffirmation that this is just a restatement of the existing rules, just kicking the ball down the field, or using old tools to fix new problems?
Great question, Mohammed. Thanks. Are we just kicking the ball down the field, or using old tools to fix new problems?
Depends on the goal, right? Depends what you want the investor and the institutional landscape to become. If you want us to be competing with Binance, then yeah, they're probably the wrong set of tools. But if you want it to be a financial industry that is somewhat similar to the existing industry in terms of investor access and investor safeguards, but crypto assets are the means of value transferring through that, then these sets of tools are probably pretty good ones. It just depends on what you want, doesn't it?
Anyone else want to add to that, or I could go on to the next question?
I just say, securities laws are generally, I mean, if you want to think of them as old tools in the sense of, the securities laws have been on the books for, I don't even know how many decades, but certainly, 75 or more. And they adapt as they have to changes in the market environment. So I'm not sure it's necessarily about kicking it down the field. The rules will have to evolve with developments in the industry and with the technology. It may be that it would be, a different process. So sort of whether legislative reform or regulatory reform would be better at achieving the policy objectives of protecting investors. But at the end of the day, I don't see this as necessarily all that different from how securities laws have had to be adapted to changes in securities markets, or changes in technology that have come. I'd say it's a pretty significant change, but in concept, it's not all that different from other changes that have led to evolutions and a refinement of the securities laws that exist, which have been on the books for, as I say, decades.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so our next question is from Paul. Said the regulator's position that all crypto asset trading platforms are captured due to not providing customers immediate delivery seems somewhat disjointed. Aren't all brokerage accounts the same in that customers do not get immediate delivery because the broker holds the securities on behalf of the customer?
That's correct. And I think that's exactly why they are trying to get them to get any platform that does that to register the same way that a broker has to register. I think to me, that's why they're making the parallel here, exactly as you have.
Okay. So next question, is there a jurisdiction due to the CSA, specifically surrounding current data localization and data flow laws? For example, if there is an investor protection issue and the cryptocurrency data is kept out of country, does the current CSA regulation capture this?
I can speak to this about the jurisdiction, and I think there's two aspects of jurisdiction here, and I think I just want to move it away from sort of data and privacy. I mean, as far as Canadian securities regulators are concerned, they have jurisdiction over the activities of parties that are dealing in securities with Canadians, regardless of where those parties may be, right? So if you're in, a company that's in some offshore jurisdiction, like the Cayman Islands, and they're operating an online platform that can be accessed by Canadians, and is accessed by Canadians, that as far as Canadian securities regulators are concerned, they have jurisdiction over that platform. And this is nothing new. They have taken that position with platforms before, and they've taken enforcement action against foreign platforms that had no employees, no offices, no traditional presence in Canada, but did have Canadian customers. I mean, and this is a long-standing position of Canadian securities regulators, and it's based on the fact that these platforms are doing business with Canadians. So that's part of it. That's the territorial side of it, which it really is, it's not all that relevant as far as regulators are concerned, where the platform is actually located. But then there's the other dimension of jurisdiction, which is, we're talking about things like Bitcoin and Ether, which everyone's accepted are not in and of themselves securities. And so how then do the securities regulators have jurisdiction to even regulate transactions in those things? And that's where you get the immediate delivery and this concept of crypto contracts. The regulator's position is that if you sell Bitcoin to someone, but you retain custody of it because you're an exchange, a custodial exchange, then that relationship is itself a security or a derivative, even if the Bitcoin that you sold to the customer is not. So there's two elements of jurisdiction here. One is sort of territorial based, and one is the subject matter. But that is how the regulators take the view that they have jurisdiction over these platforms.
I just want to mention one thing. So that's thank you for that, Evan. Back to it doesn't make sense to create new legislation specifically governing crypto. And Denise Weirs, who's chatting here, had an interesting point. So Wyoming, which is of course very active in crypto and a trailblazer in the US, created new legislation allowing DAOs to be treated as to have limited liability protection. And that was a result of the cryptocurrency community not wanting to be considered to be partners pursuant to a general partnership. So they didn't want the risk of the network creating joint and several liability amongst them. So there may be, some cases where legislation specifically dealing with crypto might be useful to avoid unintended consequences. But that certainly, I don't think that's being replicated elsewhere, and certainly I don't think is on the books in Canada, but an interesting point. I just wanted to make that point. Okay.
Awesome, thank you, Matt. So next question, do any of the privacy reforms suggested in C11 and their focus on commercial activity affect any of the existing CSA regulations?
Again, I think the Bill C11, I'm assuming that's a reference to Bill C11, which is the proposed new Federal Privacy Act. And I think the short answer to the question is no. Those are different. You're talking about very different laws, and frankly, different bodies. In this case, the securities laws are being interpreted, and those interpretations are being set out in staff notices issued by regulators. Bill C-11 is it's a federal privacy law that's being debated, at least as far as I know, is still being debated by Parliament. So I think those can be considered separately.
Okay, thank you. So this one is a Quebec question. So a company who is registered as a MSB with FinTrack and with the AMF, however, their operations cover both MSB activity and payment processing. In the payment processing model, they wish to be able to offer their merchants the ability to conduct mass payment or payout payment in crypto. They would host the wallet and there would not be any transferring of crypto between merchants or individuals. The merchant would convert their fiat into crypto and then pay out their contractors in crypto. Would the current regulations affect this type of business model? That's a big question.
Yeah, that's a long, that's kind of almost, yeah, it's a very specific question, and it would be hard to have followed that. There's something about self-hosting, or they would host the wallets and there would not be any transferring of crypto between merchants or individuals. I don't know, Laura.
Well, one thing I would like to note for you is if you're registered as an MSB, it's being transferred to Revenue Quebec pretty soon from the AMF. So just if it wasn't on your radar, I think it should be. On the very specific question, I'm going to be a typical lawyer here, and I will say that I would rather not enter into an analysis of the facts here in front of everyone. So I'm very sorry, but I don't think I can really give my legal opinion here.
Angela, if you'd like, email us at info@canadablockchain.ca, and I can forward your information to anyone here like that might be interested in having like a proper consultation with you, because I think that question might take just a little bit more time to answer than we have today. But thank you so much for your question. Please just email us and I'll put you in touch with anyone you're interested in discussing with on the panel that also is interested in communicating on this particular topic. So next question. Good, next one. Okay, so how will a decentralized exchange be affected by the latest notice? For example, if a company is not acting as an intermediary and merely providing a peer-to-peer service, then platform is not facilitating the trade for anyone's benefit. Additionally, if the client is using a self-hosted wallet, does it make that, I'm assuming he's being threshold, increasingly more difficult to achieve?
Great question. No one is for sure on this one. Depends how decentralized the exchange is. If it's decentralized like this 5 nodes, then likely going to apply. If it's decentralized like supported by Ethereum, then yeah, it's a really tough question. I wouldn't say actually that this notice would be your primary concern. I would say, Matthew spoke to it earlier, there would be concerns over what the Financial Action Task Force is proposing right now. Obligations on the coders who build a decentralized exchange are substantial, and there's no clear rule, no clear idea yet on how it's going to work actually. And this guidance that I'm speaking of is only guidance. It's not Canadian. It's that of the Financial Action Task Force is a interjurisdictional organization of which Canada is a member state. And what Canada will do is they'll look at this guidance that has been released by the Financial Action Task Force, and they'll consider whether or not to implement that into our domestic regulation. When it comes to decentralized exchanges, it depends on where it's built and if you're the exchange or if you're helping a client access the exchange in a non-custodial way. Just more details are needed on that. I'd love to discuss that with you. Super interesting. But I would say your primary concern right now is how to comply with the travel rule and things like that. as compared to what's going on in this notice. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so we have 3 questions left, being mindful we've already taken up an extra 10 minutes of your guys' time. Would you like to continue for these 3 questions, or is good?
Sure, fire away.
All right. How does this play out on blockchain transactions and swaps, pancake swap, etc.?
I think that's kind of similar to the last question.
It is, yeah, and similar response.
Yeah, I just want to, sorry, Clay, I want to jump to this. The question Mohammed had, would a marketplace like OpenSea or an NFT marketplace fall within this guidance? That's a good question. And you know, another lawyerly answer, it really depends on the facts and the circumstance. You know, I would think a platform like OpenSea, where, you know, anyone can create art and create an NFT for any dollar amount. And there's a centralized marketplace there. There might be some concerns versus, you know, maybe a portal enabling artists to sell fine art, high-end art on a one-off basis. I don't know. Yeah, I think it depends on the facts and the business model too. I just know generally there can be a lot of variation between the NFT platforms' business models, and I would be more concerned with, like I said, with a platform like OpenSea, where it's a free for all and anyone can kind of create something with the intent of reselling it, you know, for a profit on the market.
Yeah, I've done some reading into this as well. Sorry, I'll just note, I've done some reading into this as well, and more so than any other one that we discussed today or any other topic we've discussed. An NFT marketplace just really depends on facts. It just really depends. The answer can be yes, this notice will be highly relevant, and also depending on the facts, not relevant at all. So yeah, if you're looking to do something in the NFT space, you really got to consult and be able to articulate your plans in a high degree of detail.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that. One of the things I've observed in the NFT space, and it gets back to make it more concrete about what depends. Well, it may be that an NFT of a piece of art or a CryptoPunk or something like that is not itself a security. There seems to be some in the industry who are, because of the interest in NFTs, are looking to fractionalize and tokenize individual NFTs or portfolios of NFTs. And that is where you are getting into territory that looks very much like a security. So just to make that a bit more concrete about when we say it depends, it really depends on what is being done with the NFT and the arrangements between the participants in the market. Because I wouldn't want to leave anyone with the impression that an NFT or a transaction involving an NFT can never be subject to securities laws, as it quite possibly could.
You know, from a legal perspective, but I have to say the NFT market as it's sitting right now reminds me way too much of the ICO market back in 2017. And I just strongly urge anyone that's interested in tokenizing or NFTs to like dissuade themselves from that idea.
Or consult
a lawyer.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you got to look at the whole picture, right? If there's a promotion, you know, if part of the marketing is you can resell this for a profit, you know, even if it's not fractionalized, I'd be a bit concerned. You know, but like what's being said, I mean, you have to be able to articulate your business case, and really depends on the facts. Sorry, Laura.
Very well. So if you're interested in NFTs, please consult a lawyer. Absolutely, because there's so many scams coming out right now that people aren't aware of. They're not able to gain custody of their NFT. They're not able to get payouts for their NFTs, and it's, you know, a lot of it is get rich quick. So it's like, do your due diligence and your research before kind of pumping into that one. All right, so last question. Is this capturing gambling and esports sites that award cryptos on their platform achievements, etc.? So I'm assuming they're wondering if the guidance is going to be capturing esports that award in crypto.
It's a
This
Too
goes back.
too many red flags. You've got esports, you've got
gambling,
you've got crypto, and it's
the regulator's dream.
yeah. I don't want. Look, I mean, paying people in crypto is generally not subject to securities laws. Let's put it that way. But let's just say that depending how you incorporate it into your business model, may attract other legal consequences. I think one of the people should also not lose sight of the fact that there are lots of other legal regimes that may apply to activities involving crypto, including but not limited to anti-money laundering laws, gambling laws,
Criminal code
protection laws, the criminal code. Look, I think if you're asking if I can do payouts for gambling and crypto, you might want to step back and ask whether your real risk is compliance with gambling laws, which are quite seriously and rigorously enforced by other regulators and law enforcement around the world.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's it for the questions. I want to thank the panelists, you guys. This is a great job. I really believe that this is a group of Canada's leading experts in the industry, and please tune in to future Canadian Blockchain Consortium webinars. I mean, we're having one, I think, like at least once a month on the legal end. I think the next one is actually going to be on NFTs, the next legal webinar. So please stay tuned. But yeah, it's been my pleasure to host, to be the moderator. You guys are an amazing group of people. Thank you, Frank, for stepping in at the last minute, and Evan and Laura, it was great to meet you. Yeah, that's, I don't know, any other parting words, Clea, or?
No, thank you so much. We have one a little more from Deloitte that's coming up next week. Again, a bit around the IIROC compliance that's coming out. And yes, there will be the fourth week of June, we'll have a legal committee webinar again on NFTs. And there will be a FinTech committee webinar third week of June on banking. So if you're interested, please again, follow us, canadablockchain.ca, sign up for our newsletter, check out our magazine, all kinds of amazing news and updates on events are there. Again, thank you so much to our incredible panelists, and thank you so much for your extra time. You're willing to go over by like almost a half an hour. So I know everyone was like very interested in what you guys had to say. I know I definitely learned a lot. Wish I was as smart as you guys on this topic, but great to learn. So thank you guys so much. Have an amazing day and tune in for next time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.